Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your oyster ninja, and I'm here today with Suzie Florez from Stonington Kelp Company. Is that right?
That's right.
All right, Suzie. So I just got lucky enough to find you because I've been looking for a kelp company to get on the podcast because I absolutely know nothing about kelp. And I know it's great for the environment, but I know nothing about it. So I was just strolling through Instagram land, and there you are. So could you tell us about, I guess, your company first of all?
Sure. So Stonington Kelp Company was started. I started it when I was on maternity leave with my youngest, so almost 4 years ago. And what we are permitted through the state of Connecticut, we're in Stonington, Connecticut, to grow sugar kelp, and our site is located in the Fishers Island Sound. And we sell primarily to restaurants. We have farmers market, farm stand presence, and also to a lot of school cafeterias. So our seaweed can be found in the UMass school system college cafeterias.
Interesting. Okay,
I
I got
know.
there's a market for everyone, right?
There sure is.
Well, you know
Uh,
those millennials.
you can also find actually sugar kelp at Sweet Greens right now, which is you're in DC, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of those down there. So
Yeah.
you
Okay.
can
So
find
that's your
kelp.
kelp.
That's actually kelp that comes from Maine. So the sugar kelp industries, it's it's huge and established in the state of Maine. Um, and then as you go further south in New England, it kind of trickles off. So you don't really have any kelp providers in Massachusetts. I think that there might be one farm in New Hampshire, and then in Connecticut, there's a handful. And Stonington Kelp Company is the largest commercial seaweed harvester outside of Maine, but that and $1.50 can get you on the bus. So, it doesn't mean much
No.
when no one else is really doing it.
Stop it. Stop it. I hear you being modest. Okay. Um, so why kelp? I mean, you say you started it, while you were on your maternity leave. Why kelp? Like what happened?
Um, Sugar kelp is a winter crop. So we do what we call outplanting, usually right around Thanksgiving. And then the seaweed grows in our lease site. Just it kind of grows wrapped around rope that we just have anchored in the ocean all over the course of winter. So it's a really interesting off-season crop that we can take advantage of while, for instance, like a lot of fisheries are kind of shut down that time of year.
Okay.
And for us, it works out because we have a marina. So in the summer months, we're focusing on all of the marina business stuff, and then in the winter months, we can focus on the seaweed.
Cool. Okay, so you previously had a business before the kelp business.
Yes, yeah, and we still operate a marina out of Stonington.
Gotcha, gotcha. So how much research had to go into like growing kelp, or did you like dabble in it before, or what?
No, no, I'm originally from New Jersey.
Oh,
There's
okay.
no dabbling in seaweed.
Right.
So I think you know this, but seaweed it's very good for the environment. It absorbs about 20% more carbon than terrestrial plants do. So it's sucking carbon and nitrogen out of the water, and those are things that there's an excess of, unfortunately, at the moment. I was very interested in those properties. The more I read about it, the more I was like, well, is this something that I can grow? And then I learned of all of the health benefits. It's high in calcium, it's high in iron, it's high in everything that basically goes into um, my one a day multivitamin.
Right, right.
So yeah, it has a ton of health benefits. And so I looked into how to grow it just as a garden. Like, how can I just get it like my own seaweed garden set up,
Mm-hmm.
which you can't do. There's too much infrastructure that takes place underwater. So the Army Corps of Engineers has to get involved, as they should. You shouldn't have people just kind of dropping structures underwater in the ocean. That just isn't safe. Um, So we kind of looked into what it would cost to get a permit set up. And because, as I mentioned, we have a marina, we can keep our boat in the water year round and it's not a cost. So we partnered with a nonprofit actually who helps ocean farmers, get set up. And so with their guidance, it took probably about 18 months for the farm itself to just get permitted. And then we set the farm up after that. So this is actually our third harvest.
Okay, cool.
Our third harvest year. You do one harvest season a year.
That's cool. So, how do you even, all right, what goes into like harvesting? Like, do you just set it down? Like, I'm still lost. I'm trying to catch up.
It's so the way that the farm is set up, right? So we lease a space in the ocean. It's a 10-acre site, and the average depth is probably like 25 feet.
Okay.
So what we do is we drop an anchor down, and then attached to that anchor is like a giant floating mooring ball, and we drop, let's say 3 of those get dropped in a line. Then what we do is we attach another line horizontally from mooring ball to mooring ball, so that there's a horizontal line that's held in place by those vertical mooring anchors. The kelp grows around that horizontal line. So when we come to harvest it, we just pull our boat up alongside. Sometimes we use a crane. Sometimes I'll just physically lift the line out of the water. And then I just use a knife to slice the kelp off, and I put it in a fish basket or like a food grade bucket. And I ride my boat back to my docks, and then I put it in whatever packaging it's going to be going, or dehydrate it, or kind of just start the steps of how to make it ready for the market, and that's that.
What does that look like, getting it ready for the market?
It's really it's quite simple. Most often I sell it fresh raw, so I'm harvesting it from the ocean, and then people, a lot of farm to table, sea to table chefs, they want it raw so they can kind of do their own thing with it. They can experiment with it. Most often people are getting their seaweed, I think it's like 95% of it is imported from overseas. So when it's imported, they have to process it to stabilize it. And that kind of takes away a lot of the different things you can do with your seaweed. So they're getting the raw product from me, which allows them flexibility to be creative, like use it. And it also has a better flavor, to be perfectly honest. It's much more mild. It's not like that concentrated, super salty taste. But so what I'm doing is just kind of putting it in a compostable container and giving it to the people who want to buy it.
Got you. And as far as like starting the process over, does the process just keep going? Do you have to start it off, or how does that work?
So we call it outplanting. So that in November, when we outplant our farm, we're actually getting spools of kite string that are wrapped around PVC pipe that have the kelp, tiny little 1 centimeter kelp blades already growing on it. You have to get, sorry, there's a battle going on upstairs.
No doubt.
You have to get your kelp from an approved seed source. And it's heavily regulated just to make sure that people aren't putting invasive species in the water or anything like that.
Makes sense.
We get our seaweed from the nonprofit that we partnered with. They're called Green Wave out of New Haven, Connecticut.
Green Wave, I've heard of that recently.
Yeah. And they're great. They're wonderful to work with. And if anybody was interested in seaweed farming, they should consider reaching out to them. But we outplant our farm. But in June every year, so when the seaweed, we've harvested what we want to harvest, we physically remove our farm from the ocean. So we lift all of our gear up, and then it's like we were never there. And that's how we're permitted. So that's our legal responsibility. And this is because the area where we are in Stonington is a huge recreational boating community.
Right.
So we do that to kind of keep the boaters safe and allow people to fish the area.
Gotcha. So as far as like since the beginning, when you started almost 4 years ago, and now, can you tell a big difference in the water quality?
That's a really great question. I have anecdotal evidence. For instance, I see more water birds. They're always on the kelp farm. So when we're riding the boat out, to head out to the kelp farm, I'm following my GPS. Before I even see my mooring balls, I can tell where the farm is because I see the water birds are all hanging out. And it's because my, theory is they're there because there's more fish that want to be in that area. And there's more fish in that area because it's habitat. There's also a ton of other shellfish and small microorganisms in the water that are really driven by the fact that the seaweed is creating a halo effect. So it's kind of cleansing the water that goes through. In order to kind of prove this out, we are doing a research project with UConn right now where we're sending tissue samples of our seaweed so that they can actually measure the amount of nitrogen and carbon that our farm is sequestering. And then we extrapolate that based on the size of the farm. So I'm glad that we're going to have some real data, but everything else is just me like, oh, I saw a seal today. That must be speaking the ocean. I'm wonderful.
Right. But that's pretty fancy though. I mean, you can actually see and tell, your contributions to the environment. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not just my contributions though, because every single person that seeks out seaweed to consume means that our farm or any other seaweed farm can grow bigger. And so that you can really kind of use your money to help drive demand for something that is restoring the oceans, especially it specifically absorbs nitrogen, which is something that humans create. And that's all on us,
Right. So not to get, in your business financially, but what has like the growth been just like far as like, the farm, like, like, are you surprised or how's it been?
I'm always surprised and I'm always a little nervous. So this isn't people don't go into seaweed farming to get rich for sure. But, especially we're a smaller scale farm. So we're developing seaweed just for human consumption.
Gotcha.
We're not doing it for fertilizer. We're not doing it as like, an ingredient in soaps. And that's just because the permitting is set up that like we're so heavily regulated that, we might as well sell it for human consumption because that's the kind of highest grade that you can possibly make.
Right.
And we're a 10-acre farm, which sounds pretty big, but it's not big compared to ones that are out in Alaska or, a lot of the ones out there in Maine. But that being said, our farm has grown, year over year substantially. And this year was set to be a pretty great year. A lot of things have been changing, but I'm still holding out. Like I think the farm will end up in the black, which is nice,
Okay. Good. So yeah, speaking of changes, how has the farm changed with this COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything?
So most of my customers are those farm to table restaurants, which, I'm in New England, and in this region, it's been there's a lot of everything's shut down. There's like we're on state lockdown. So for me, my restaurants in Boston, my restaurants in Providence, Rhode Island, my restaurants in all across Connecticut, and restaurants in New York, they're all shut down. So that's, one huge market that's closed off. And the farmers markets for the most part are also closed off. But we've been finding other avenues. We have a farm stand. We're president of a couple other farm stands, and people are still seeking it out. So,
right.
Again, like I said, I'm hopeful that as things start to lessen, like our farm season ends in June. So hopefully we'll have some restaurant business back in May, and also the colleges were all closed.
Right. Of course.
I kind of got like Tyson punched by COVID, but that's okay. I'm healthy, so it's fine. There's always next year.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the blessing right there. We can keep going and, just kind of prep for the next year, next harvest or everything like that.
So I just wanted to share this little interesting fact about seaweed and its connection to oysters, since you are
cool.
the oyster ninja.
Yes, indeed.
Hopefully, Izzy, you gotta.
I totally understand.
So this scientist, she studied algae. She was a phycologist, but her research, the nori business in Japan had just been completely wiped out because they couldn't figure out how to grow the seaweed from seed in an area where they wanted it to grow. So, like I said, the way that I get my pre-seeded kelp blades from Greenwave, that all of that came from the research this one woman did. And the research was essentially, she figured out a stage in the life cycle of algae that needs an enclosed kind of habitat in order for it to develop. And if you give it that habitat, it will grow in the area where you're telling it to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so the nori business was saved by them introducing oyster shells to their
Oh,
seaweed farms. So the
nice.
baby kelp all grew within the oyster shells, and so the oysters saved seaweed in
Look
Japan.
at
And
that.
that whole
Teaming
process,
up.
yeah. And it's great. Sometimes I get oysters too that have little seaweed uh, um, attached to them, and it
uh,
just makes me very happy that the partnership still exists.
Right, right, no doubt. Could you just talk about like the different because like I said, I had never heard of sugar kelp. So like how many varieties are there and like what's the difference?
There's a ton. There is a ton,
Okay.
ton of varieties out there. So my farm's in Connecticut waters. I'm right on the New York Rhode Island border though, which is interesting because just for water is fluid. So
Right.
um, I'm still regulated though under the state of Connecticut. And in Connecticut, you can only grow for human consumption sugar kelp out in the open ocean. Sugar kelp is one of like I think 30 different kelp varieties. There's, bull kelp. There's like the giant kelp forests that are out in California.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the Long Island Sound, I think that there's about 40 different varieties of seaweed. Some of them poisonous, some of them edible, that you can, kind of go out and harvest and eat. There's sea lettuce, there's gracilaria, there's um, obviously kelp, there's dulse, which is, people call that the bacon of the sea. I
Okay.
think that if you can fry it up and it has like a really good sort of a umami flavor.
All right. There we
But
go.
yeah, it's all out there. It's just the industry is so new that they haven't quite figured out how to regulate all of those other species, nor have they figured out kind of the environmental impacts of growing it at scale. But they have figured that out with kelp, which is why the sugar kelp is what I grow. I didn't seek out sugar kelp; it was just the only option.
Gotcha, gotcha. So is there any different variety that's like on the breaking point of like, all right, we're almost there, you can start growing this, you know, is there any on the way?
Not that I know of in Connecticut, but I am really bothering the people at the State Department to see if they could figure it out for the dulse, because I think that that would be a really fun one, a fun one to cultivate.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know you did speak about like the different vitamins, but could you just, talk about like why we should be eating kelp?
Yeah, it's well, aside from the amazing environmental impacts that it has,
Right.
um, it also it's in addition to the fact that it absorbs carbon and nitrogen, it's also it's like a zero input crop. So unlike if you're eating wheat, for instance, they're using fertilizer. They're using arable land. They're using fresh water that we kind of are running low on as well as a world, as a planet.
Right.
Um, in the seaweed cultivation requires none of that. So it's the only thing you need is just kind of like a boat, some rope, some anchors, and some flotation. So there's that. It's extremely sustainable, but it has it's very high in calcium. It's very high in iron. It has a lot of trace minerals that are very difficult to get from terrestrial plants, including magnesium, copper. It's very high in iodine, which can be a great thing for some people, but if somebody has an iodine sensitivity, it's not great. But you can
Right.
reduce the amount of iodine in it by through different methods of cooking.
Mm-hmm.
You also can reduce the iodine by eating it along with certain vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower, any cruciferous vegetable. So it's overall very good for you, and it has omega-3s as well. And there's it has like water retention properties also. I love it.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I'm a believer in that. I mean, I always like the dried like chips
Yeah,
and then like seaweed salad. As far as I get though.
and that's super common. But the nice thing about getting it, like I said, the nice thing about getting it fresh, or even just getting it from somewhere in the United States, is that since it absorbs so much out of the water, right? But I have
Mm-hmm.
to grow my seaweed in an approved aquaculture site where they test my seaweed, they take it to the lab, the Department of Agriculture, tests it for heavy metal contamination. They test it for all different types of bacteria. They test the water constantly, and they allocate the site based on like water quality. It's got to be an area where people are allowed to do commercial fishing. So when you get it imported, you don't know if the environmental standards are the same. So it could be absorbing loads of crap that you don't want to put in your body.
That makes sense.
So it is something to consider. So you know that, for instance, the seaweed that's coming out of, Maine is grown in water that's clean enough for people to eat shellfish out of.
Right,
So,
right.
Just something to think about. But this is the seaweed that you could use if you wanted to make your own seaweed salad at home.
Gotcha. Any good recipes?
I'm really fond of it's a seaweed and cucumber salad. So it's simply just dicing up very thin cucumbers, dicing up very thin the seaweed. You take the seaweed when you get it fresh raw, and you just drop it in like almost boiling water for about 15 seconds, and it goes from this olive color to like bright green, that green you see in seaweed salad.
Right, right.
Then you just kind of slice it up. I use sometimes a pizza cutter or a mezzaluna knife to whatever shape you think is appropriate for bite size.
Right.
And then you just make, and I add feta cheese as well. And then I do like a little sesame maple syrup vinaigrette on top.
Come on now.
It's so easy, and it's so good. I use it to impress people all the time.
Yeah, it sounds fancy.
I use it to entertain.
No doubt, no doubt. So how can the listeners and the viewers, how can they participate in like just reaching out to your company and supporting right now?
They can find me at stoningtonkelpcompany.com or on Instagram and at Stonington Kelp Co. And reach out. And so we have a couple different avenues how we're getting product out to people. And then there's a couple different options. It just depends on where you are. This is a temperature, when you get fresh raw, it is temperature controlled. So we have to keep it refrigerated. So just like if you were shipping, oysters.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, we're thinking about a partnership with Fisher's Island Oyster Company, where you could get a box of oysters along with kelp, and I believe we're thinking about maybe mushrooms as well.
Nice. Yeah, they have some good oysters.
They have some very good oysters. I'm a big fan. Yeah. So that's another thing to be on the lookout for. And then we also have the dehydrated. We have the spices as well.
Okay.
The dried out, which is just dried kelp seed spice. It's awesome.
Okay. All right. Well, any final thoughts or anything you want to add?
No, this was really fun.
Cool.
I really appreciate the chance to talk to you, and I'm very, very happy you reached out.
No, it is my pleasure. It is my pleasure, and I learned a lot. And I'm gonna go on the website and see what I can find, because I need some of that kelp in my life.
Kelp goodness. All right, sounds good.
All right, appreciate your time, and you guys go and get you some kelp. All right, see you. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.